My guest on the record this month is widely regarded as one of the most highly regarded corporate speakers. He looks into the future as a demographer. He looks at trends from the past and how they will indeed play out into the future. Best known perhaps to the wider community for his penchant when it comes to identifying and tagging new tribes as well as behaviours such as the sea change shift, the man drought, pumpkins, the goat's cheese curtain, and more recently as the infamous smashed avo critic when he wrote a provocative column in The Australian criticising indeed young people. Maybe their inability to save for housing could be sated if they ate more at home rather than paying $22 for smashed avocado on toast. Bernard Salt delivers some 120 speeches a year on the circuit, has done so for more than a decade, as well as prolific writings in The Australian, a slew of books, 6 to his name. This, the latest, More Decent Obsessions, bringing together a lifetime of thought, reflection, and a remarkable ability to pull at the numbers, to pull on strings. Bernard Salt, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
From smashed avo to going home and a humble upbringing where probably avocado was the last thing on the menu in Terang in Western Victoria. Talk to me.
What's the journey? Do you know, I did not know what an avocado was until I was 15, in fact. I'd never heard of the term. I had never heard of the word zucchini until I had left home. I'd never tasted a pizza until I'd left Terang. It was a very cosseted Anglo island, if you like, back in Western Victoria, back in the 1960s and early 1970s. And of course, then I came to Melbourne to university, and it was another world. I was absolutely entranced by the cosmopolitanness and the sheer scale of Melbourne and of the big city, if you like.
Let's get to education shortly. I mean, the fact that you could get there because fees didn't exist is something of it in itself, but just in terms of family, siblings, one of 6, the second youngest?
I was one of 6 kids, born in a country town in Western Victoria. Mum and Dad would proudly describe themselves as working class people. I once asked my father why he didn't go to university. And he roared laughing and said, only rich people go to university.
Right.
And it was if this was not part of anything that we should even consider. Of course, all that changed in 1972 when Gough Whitlam made university fee free. Okay. And of course, by 1975, when I'd left school, it was suddenly possible. I was able to do what no one from my family had done before. This was an extraordinary event. It was like going to Mars or going to London or something like that, so going to university.
What was the spur there? Because your mother was doing what at the time, and likewise your father. What were those influences?
My father grew up in a tiny village, if you like, in Western Victoria.
Right.
His father was a shearer. He was a farm labourer. Mum came from Western Victoria. Her mother was a housekeeper in the big squatter houses, if you like. We were a working class family, but a very strong work ethic when I look back at it. Mum and Dad both worked very, very hard. We grew vegetables in the backyard.
You know, foraging for mushrooms.
It was almost like a Norman Rockwell upbringing, if you like, back in the 1960s or so. I did not know there was such a thing as private schools. I was shocked. Why would people go to a private school when there's a primary school or a state secondary school? So I was completely or blissfully unaware of such divisions.
You've written that you went to church on Sunday, you prayed as a family on your knees in the lounge room of an evening. What were the themes at prayer time?
There was a great ritual to working class life. There was home, there was school, there was the sporting field, so the football club and the swimming pool, and then there was church on Sundays, and we would go to Mass on Sundays. We'd have a Sunday roast. We would pray the rosary every night as a family, so 6 kids, mum and dad, and we would recite the prayers of the rosary. I was an altar boy. My older brothers were altar boys. They could recite the Mass in Latin, in fact. So it was a very, very traditional world, almost on the cusp of significant social change which took place from the late 70s onwards.
Which is very interesting, because Napoleon, of all people, said if you want to understand a man or a woman and the world that they were in at 20 gives you a very good steer.
Oh, there is no doubt about that. I would say when I was about 15, I suddenly became aware of a wider world of Melbourne, of class division, if you like. And I resolved then, quite logically but determinedly, that I wanted to break free. I wanted to change the paradigm. I wanted to go to university. And so I was very, very focused on that social transition, if you like.
So by the early 70s, your siblings, your older ones, they were either leaving home or they'd gone. So you had, in that regard, some kind of a template on what the future was looking like.
There is a format to leaving a country town. Back in the 1970s, you could join the bank and become a teller, and had two brothers that did that. You could become a school teacher. Another brother took that pathway. Or you could join the convent, and a sister, of course, took that route. I went to university and was intent on being a school teacher, because growing up in Tirang, the most successful people I came in contact with were school teachers, and I admired them. I got on well with school teachers, so I pursued a teaching course.
On that very score, who made the impression the most?
It was particular school teachers. I had a very good geography school teacher and another Australian history school teacher. I gravitated towards these people and towards the subject matter as well, and I saw a fusion between geography, which was looking at the way in which society was organised, and history, the way in which society evolved. And in many respects, I'm doing exactly the same now. Instead of looking back, I'm actually looking forward to Australian society.
How much encouragement were you getting when you took that leap to say, I'm going where no one else in the family's gone before, off to university?
I suppose the family knew that this was my trajectory from the age of 15 or so. There was a bit of scepticism, but there was also a bit of, well, good on him, see where he can get to in life. He might actually become a school teacher. In fact, I did my teaching degree, didn't actually teach, but went on to do another degree and then fell into consulting, and it all went on from there.
It's interesting you say you fell into consulting, but it's kind of where all things have come together, to your point, on both the interest as well as the aptitude front. On the aptitude itself, you've said, look, some things endure regardless of how life turns out or where you end up. One of them is a sense of self-worth that's carried forward forever from a secure and loving childhood. There's a wonderful anecdote on that where you're fishing. Tell me about this one.
Back in the 1960s, when we were living in Tirang, the family would have an annual holiday at Port Campbell, which is on the what is known as the shipwreck coast of Western Victoria. And my father would take his three boys, I was the youngest, fishing off the rocks. And these were sheer cliff drops of 100 metres, or what seemed like 100 metres. And as you got close to the edge, there'd be rubble. And so we'd be walking along these sheer cliffs in order to cast the rods into the water. And Dad would say to his four sons trailing him behind, saying, careful you don't fall in. Oh, right. I was scared witless. But, there was a nonchalance, there was a carefree, it was, total trust in the family unit. Of course, everything was fine, but I still reflect on those times. There was a boldness, there was an edginess to it. But there was also a security in the family tribe, having three older brothers and a father. Being the youngest, or the second youngest, it's very warm, it's very embracing, it's very secure as a kid to grow up in a loving family like that.
There's also, though, a certain degree of hierarchy by definition as well. Now, you've said of your own career, that you look back, you regret how hierarchical early on things were. You were too respectful of authority. By contrast, millennials know no fear.
Well, in actual fact, I think being number 5 out of 6 kids, raised in a working class family by parents that remember and would talk about the Great Depression, you knew your place. I knew my place in the family because they're older brothers who would put you in your place, if you like. But I also think that these were the times. Society was controlled by people that had come from the war and from the depression. The way to survive war and depression was to come together with everyone doing their bit, if you like. You knew your place in society.
When you reflect, Bernard, on having moved on, because you did, you broke free to your point, and then even now, looking back at the surviving siblings, because you've lost a few along the way, right?
I have indeed, yes. Unfortunately, my immediately older brother died of pancreatic cancer, and my younger sister tragically died from bowel cancer, leaving a family of 9, in fact. And it really does shake you up, of course, and you think, well, why them? Why not me? And if anything, not just does it make me focus on health issues, but it also makes me think, appreciate the years that you have. Don't leave anything on the table. If for whatever reason something happened and I could see my own mortality looming up in front of me, I don't want to think, I wish I'd had a go. I wish I'd put it all out there. That's what I'm doing. I'm putting it all out there.
Talk me about the transition from uni to white collar.
Well, from university, I should have gone out teaching, but decided I wanted to do something else. Did a master's degree. Then fell into consulting. I didn't know consultants existed, and in fact I worked for 2 years for what was known as the Geelong Regional Commission, which was a planning authority, and had exposure to consultants. And I'd read these consultant reports and think, this is how much they charged and this is what they produced. I can do better than that.
Right.
I could do a lot better than that. And in fact, I was correct. A job came up, I applied for it, got it, and found this is unbelievable. I am working on different locations around Australia. The effort-reward equation certainly worked for me. It was exciting, it was engaging, work on big projects. I felt like a young footballer suddenly getting a game at the MCG in front of the big crowd. You're on the big stage working on the big projects. It was unbelievably exciting.
Was it all falling quite naturally about you, or did you realise that you needed to work on X, Y, or Z though still at that level?
It was not so much a skill set or a realisation that, look, I really need to be running my own show. Rather than being an employee, I actually wanted to get hold of the steering wheel. I felt that my skill set and ability to attract, retain and engage clients was the next step, if you like.
How long did that take you to make?
I was working as a consultant for about 3 or 4 years or so, and 3 or 4 years I thought I knew it all.
Right.
And wanted to be a partner in or running one of these businesses, and ultimately I did, but it took at least 10 years to actually get to that particular position.
Along the way, the advice in-house, correct me if I'm wrong, was you're on the wrong track, Bernard. Get off now before you regret it.
20 years ago, in fact, I was taken aside by the boss that I had at that time, and he was very well-meaning. And he said, look, Bernard, give the demographics thing away. It's never going to get you anywhere. And I thought at that time, look, you're probably right, but I enjoy it. I'm engaged by it. I like what I do. And so I don't earn a lot of money. That's fine. I'm doing what I like. By making that decision, doing what you are passionate about, that you believe about, to the exclusion of what makes sense financially, that passion, I am told, comes through in my speaking and in my writing. I might be wrong, but I'm deluded about it because I actually firmly believe it.
Yeah.
So that commitment to insightfully, hopefully, interpreting Australian culture and society actually comes through. My advice to people is stick to your guns, do what you are good at, do what you are passionate about. Ultimately, the financials will correct themselves in due course.
The support network, your wife, your 2 children, and how all that has a role rather than being on the periphery, is still somehow you managed to make that core.
My wife and I have been married. We We met in high school, believe it or not, and we have two wonderful children. My oldest son is 30, in fact, works as a lawyer in Copenhagen, and my daughter is in corporate life in Melbourne. And they have been wonderfully supportive. My wife in particular very much supports what I do. She doesn't like the number of nights I'm away from home, of course, speaking, but knows that this is what I'm passionate about, and ultimately this supports the quality of life that the family has.
Is she someone also who will give you something of a reality check now and again, and does that come on holidays, or is it sort of prompted to take a holiday over? I mean, I'm wondering how you get those moments of escape and what motivates you to take those moments.
Well, we have a very clear regime throughout the year. I take a month off in the middle of the Australian winter, and we spend that in Europe, often as a family, which is very enjoyable. And then over summer, we take another month down at the beach. This is over the last 10 years or so. In the early years, in my 20s, 30s and 40s, while you're building a career, you can't take time off like that. So I do have time with my family, of course, throughout the year. And then on a weekend, I don't work on a weekend. I'm always home by a Friday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm out speaking or whatever. But they keep me very grounded, very balanced, in fact, and have followed my career, of course, and can often offer very wise counsel. In fact, my wife is, and my daughter in particular, my greatest critics and wonderful supporters. My son as well. I remember during the smashed avocado incident, on the day that exploded across the world, and all of this vehemence was being directed at me. He was in Copenhagen getting emails from his friends, and he said, "Dad, I've looked at what you've said. You haven't said anything sexist or racist. You know, you're fine. It'll turn in due course." And having that advice from a 29-year-old on the other side of the world was actually very, very reassuring. He was 100% right, of course. Wise head on young shoulders.
It either gets addressed in interviews, I know, or it gets sidelined. But the point is, it had a powerful, as you say, ripple effect. It went global. What really, though, from your own personal experience, does it speak to?
I think the reason why it ignited across the globe is because this issue, I don't think, had really been ignited properly previously, and I blundered into the area with this satirical piece, actually poking fun at baby boomers. But in fact, when it goes to Twitter doesn't show context, it just shows 2 or 3 sentences without the context. You can't see that this is actually satire, in fact. But it has since become a signature, if you like, or symptomatic of a broader issue of affordable housing, which, as I understand, not just an issue in Australia, but certainly in America, the UK, elsewhere as well.
What do you say really that touchstone issue is down to?
Well, I think that the whole unaffordable housing issue is certainly very much the case in London, New York, maybe Tokyo, and certainly Sydney, Australia. Sydney, Australia is a global city. And it means that it attracts global workers with the global capacity to pay. Unaffordability is less of an issue in Melbourne, and I would say not so much of an issue in Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, let alone in regional Australia. It's very much a Sydney issue. Maybe it's an issue of supply. Maybe there is some issue around people losing heart, if you like, not being able to see, being able to save for a house, therefore they focus on entertainment or whatever.
It starts to where we began this interview, which is your own beginnings, rural relative to urban, and this questioning of whether we can turn the clock back, and the whole way that society and the fabric of society is affected by either living in shoeboxes or living in a fibro, but with somewhere to run around outside and feel the grass under your feet.
There is no doubt that anyone of my age, say mid-baby boomer age, would certainly draw a sharp comparison between their childhood experiences and the experience of young people today. And I'm certainly not of the view that we should be turning the clock back. But you cannot but be struck by the shift in thinking, in values, priorities, even lifestyles, in fact. I actually think that Australia is a far more interesting, far fairer, far more caring society today than it was back in the 1960s. When you look at some of the revelations of our